Or is this full-time MMA now?
I love full-time MMA right now.
Back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
UFC President Dana White, El Jefe, says he has no problem if Eddie Alvarez wants to finish his career outside the UFC. And this is, of course, coming after Eddie Alvarez lost to Dustin Poirier in the main event of UFC Calgary, when Eddie Alvarez decided to gamble on himself and fight out his contract. Now, he decided to gamble, and if you're a gambler, you know, most of the time you lose. But on a serious note, he decided to gamble on himself, and he did lose. And so now he might not get the contract or the money that he wants in the contract from the UFC, and he might have to look elsewhere outside the UFC, like potentially Bellator or another MMA organization, to see if he can get the money he wants. This is what Dana White had to say about Eddie Alvarez on the UFC Unfiltered podcast. I like Eddie Alvarez. I like him personally, and I like him professionally. He's at an age now where he needs to make some decisions for his family and for what will probably be the last contract he signs for the rest of his career. I'm in a place, if Eddie wants to go somewhere else and try it, I'm cool with that. If Eddie wants to stay, I'd keep him here too. Now, personally, what that sounds like to me is the UFC made Eddie Alvarez an offer, and it's a take it or leave it type deal. Hey, you gambled on yourself, you lost. So, with that being said, here's our offer. If you don't like the offer, we're standing firm on it. We would love for you to accept this offer and stay with the UFC. But if you feel like you're worth more, we're also okay if you decide to leave and go back to Bellator. Now, with that being said, that's a little bit of an interesting situation for Eddie Alvarez, because he already fought for Bellator in the past, and I believe it was a little bit of an unceremonious exit. He didn't have the best relationship with the upper management at the time. I believe it was under Bjorn Rebney, who's no longer with Bellator, so maybe he could go back there because Bjorn Rebney's no longer with the company. Maybe he could form a new relationship with Scott Cochran. He'd be cool over there, but still, I mean, a lot of fighters get into this wanting to fight for the UFC. They are the most prestigious, and you could say the A-League of the MMA world. So they're definitely the most prestigious MMA organization. So I'm sure Eddie Alvarez would love to fight for the UFC, but it is what it is. He decided to gamble on his future, and now he's going to have to deal with the repercussions with whatever contract comes from the UFC. Now, I'll say this. It could have been great for Eddie Alvarez. If he would have won that fight with Dustin Poirier, he would have probably got everything he was asking for, because he would have beat one of the top contenders in the stacked UFC lightweight division, and he could be looking at a potential another title shot in the UFC. And I don't think the UFC would want to let one of their top 3 lightweights go to another organization, especially coming off of a big win over Dustin Poirier. So that was part of the gamble. If he beat Dustin Poirier, Eddie Alvarez is sitting pretty right now. But now he lost, and Dana White's letting us know, yeah, we would love to keep Eddie, but if he wants to go somewhere else to try and find a better contract, especially because it's going to be the last contract of his career, then we would understand as well. So it looks like the ball's in Eddie Alvarez's court. We'll see if he stays with the UFC or if he decides to test the waters and test free agency. But I'll just put this in your head before we get out of here. I would still love to see Michael Chandler versus Eddie Alvarez 3. I think that's a fight all the fans would love to see. Another fight between those guys. Both the first fights played out complete wars, fan favorite fights. I mean, back and forth. And it's just a great fight that the fans would love to see, I think. It's a fan-friendly fight. And with that being said, both of these guys are coming up on free agency. That's what's crazy. I talked about this a little on the live stream. Could you imagine if Eddie Alvarez became a free agent and then Michael Chandler became a free agent, and fucking instead of UFC and Bellator, like Oscar De La Hoya swooped in and grabbed a fight we actually wanted to see that's not way past its expiration date? I mean, Oscar De La Hoya is trying to start an MMA organization, and he's got like Chuck and Tito to come off their couch or wherever they were chilling and get ready to fight at like 50 years old. So this would be a fight the fans actually wanted if some other MMA organization could get their hands on Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler. But as of right now, one's in the UFC, one's in Bellator. They're both coming up on free agency, so we'll see what happens. But I do know that Michael Chandler's talked about going to the UFC. If you listen to him on the Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan was like trying to recruit him low-key. Like, I know you'd like to come to the UFC, Chandler, you know, so So I know the UFC would love to have Michael Chandler, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bellator would love to have Eddie Alvarez back. I mean, he's got a history with Conor McGregor, former UFC champion. So Eddie Alvarez's stock is still relatively high compared to other MMA fighters, even though he gambled on himself and he lost against Dustin Poirier. But with that being said, it is what it is, man. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. And before we go, shout out to all the full-time MMA white belts that have hit the subscribe button. Make sure you also hit the bell right next to it so you get notified every time I upload a new video, or some of the time that I upload a new video, because YouTube's notification bell is a player hater. But this is one of the hardest working independent MMA channels on YouTube. We provide daily updates, full fight card breakdowns and predictions. We make MMA fighter freestyles, and we've already interviewed pro fighters Aljamain Sterling, Sean O'Malley, Felony Charles Bennett, and Bruce Lushmedio in just a little over a year as an MMA channel. We're one of the fastest growing MMA channels on YouTube. So with that being said, if you're interested in more videos like this, check out the Full-Time MMA Dojo over at patreon.com. One of the things you can see while you're over there are some of the goals of the channel, and also more free videos like this, betting advice, and more. We just launched the Full-Time MMA store over on teespring.com, and we've got some limited edition gear in order to celebrate that. We've got some Day One Foot the Other Side shirts that are only available for a limited time. Also, you got leggings, phone cases, Don't Be a Bagel Biter coffee mugs, and more. With that being said, you can check the links out in the description if you want to check out the Full-Time MMA Dojo or the Full-Time MMA store on Teespring. Respect. Let the Full-Time family know what you think in the comments. I'm out.
Da 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 da! It's the motherfucking DOG.